The hidden teaching. There's a verse in the Bible that most people have read, nodded at, and promptly forgotten. It appears in Matthew 6:22-3, nestled between teachings about storing treasures in heaven and serving two masters. Jesus says something peculiar. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Your eye be single. What does that even mean? Most pastors will tell you it's about having pure intentions or maintaining spiritual focus. Some translations render it as having a good eye or healthy eye, suggesting it's a metaphor for generosity versus greed. And while those interpretations aren't necessarily wrong, they're only scratching the surface of what may be one of the most powerful and deliberately obscured teachings Jesus ever gave. What if I told you that this verse isn't just moral instruction, but an actual anatomical and spiritual roadmap? What if the single eye refers to a very real organ in your body, one that ancient mystics, shamans, and enlightened beings throughout history have understood as the gateway to higher consciousness, spiritual power, and direct knowledge of the divine? This isn't New Age speculation. It's a teaching that's been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years, encoded in scripture, carved into temples, and whispered through mystery schools across every major spiritual tradition on earth. The Egyptians called it the Eye of Horus. Hindus and Buddhists know it as the Ajna Chakra. Philosophers like Descartes referred to it as the seat of the soul. And modern science has confirmed it's one of the most mysterious and least understood organs in the human body. I'm talking about the pineal gland, your third eye. And once you understand what Jesus was really teaching in this passage, you'll realize why certain institutions might have preferred you didn't know. Because this isn't just about seeing more clearly or having better morals. This is about accessing a form of power and knowledge that, when awakened, makes you sovereign, unchained, and impossible to control through external authority. This is about reclaiming what's been hidden from you. The biblical context and literal interpretation. Let's start with the full passage so we understand what we're working with. In Matthew 6:22-3, Jesus says, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?" On the surface, this seems like a continuation of the Sermon on the Mount's themes about purity of heart and proper spiritual orientation. Just before this, Jesus talked about storing treasures in heaven rather than on earth. Just after, he warns against serving both God and money. The traditional interpretation positions this single eye teaching as a bridge between these ideas, essentially. Keep your focus pure and singular in your devotion. Some scholars translate the Greek word hapless, rendered as single, as simple, sound, or generous. This has led to interpretations about having an undivided heart, being spiritually focused, or maintaining generosity rather than stinginess. These readings fit neatly into conventional religious teaching. Be good, stay focused, don't be greedy. But here's the problem. This interpretation, while morally sound, doesn't explain the specific and peculiar language Jesus uses. Why single eye rather than pure heart? Why the emphasis on light, filling the entire body? Why the stark contrast between light and darkness being internal rather than external? Why frame the whole teaching around an anatomical feature, the eye, if this is purely metaphorical? And perhaps most tellingly, why does this same teaching about the single eye or third eye appear in mystical and esoteric traditions completely separate from Judeo-Christian scripture, using remarkably similar language about light, illumination, and inner vision? The answer becomes clear when we stop reading the Bible exclusively through the lens of Western institutionalized Christianity and start recognizing that Jesus was teaching within a much older tradition of mystical wisdom, one that understood the human body as a temple containing dormant spiritual capacities waiting to be awakened. The pineal gland, biology meets mysticism. Deep in the center of your brain, tucked between the two hemispheres, sits a tiny pine cone-shaped organ about the size of a grain of rice. This is the pineal gland, and it's one of the most fascinating and mysterious structures in human anatomy. Biologically, science tells us the pineal gland's primary function is producing melatonin, the hormone that regulates your sleep-wake cycles. It responds to light and darkness, acting as your body's internal clock. But here's where it gets interesting. The pineal gland contains cells similar to the photoreceptors in your retinas. It's literally built to detect light, even though it's buried deep in your brain where no external light can reach it. Even stranger, the pineal gland is the only unpaired organ in the brain. Everything else comes in twos, left and right hemispheres. It sits alone, singular, at the geometric center of your head. Its location corresponds almost exactly to the point between your eyebrows that every meditation tradition tells you to focus on. Now, mainstream science will tell you the pineal gland is mostly vestigial in humans, an evolutionary holdover that doesn't do much beyond melatonin production. But recent research has revealed some startling facts. The pineal gland produces DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the most powerful naturally occurring psychedelic compound known to man. DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, the shamanic brew that produces profound mystical experiences, visions, and encounters with what users consistently describe as divine or interdimensional entities. Your brain produces this substance naturally. The question is, why? Some researchers, including Dr. Rick Strassman, who conducted the first legal human studies on DMT in decades, have theorized that the pineal gland may release DMT during birth, death, dreams, and mystical experiences. Could this tiny gland be the biological mechanism behind spiritual awakening, near-death experiences, and prophetic visions? Ancient cultures seem to know something modern science is only beginning to rediscover. The pineal gland appears in sacred art and architecture worldwide. The Staff of Osiris in Egypt features a pine cone at its top. The largest pine cone statue in the world sits in the Vatican's Court of the Pine Cone. Hindu deities are depicted with a top-knot or flame at the crown, corresponding to the pineal location. Assyrian gods hold pine cones in their hands in carvings dating back thousands of years. René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, called the pineal gland the principal seat of the soul, and believed it was the point where the immaterial mind interacts with the physical body. He wasn't just speculating, he was echoing a teaching that goes back to the very beginning of recorded spiritual wisdom. The pineal gland is your third eye. It's the single eye Jesus spoke of. And when it's awakened, when it's truly single in its focus and function, it becomes the gateway to experiences and knowledge that transcend ordinary consciousness. The third eye across traditions. If the teaching about the single eye were unique to Christianity, we might dismiss the mystical interpretation as wishful thinking. But the remarkable truth is that virtually every major spiritual tradition on earth has teachings about a third eye or inner eye that unlocks higher consciousness. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the third eye is known as the Ajna chakra, the sixth of 7 energy centers in the subtle body. Located at the brow point between and slightly above the eyebrows, the Ajna is considered the seat of intuition, wisdom, and direct spiritual perception. When awakened, it's said to provide access to higher states of consciousness, psychic abilities, and the dissolution of duality. The Sanskrit word ajna means command or authority. Opening this center gives you sovereignty over your own consciousness. Shiva, one of Hinduism's principal deities, is often depicted with a third eye in the middle of his forehead. When opened, this eye can see truth beyond illusion, and in mythology could destroy anything. It gazed upon a metaphor for how awakened perception destroys ignorance and falsehood. In ancient Egypt, the Eye of Horus, one of the most powerful and prevalent symbols in Egyptian spirituality, is a stylized representation of the human brain's cross-section, with the pupil and surrounding marks corresponding precisely to the location and shape of the pineal gland, thalamus, and corpus callosum. The Egyptians didn't just stumble upon this symbolism, they understood the connection between this brain structure and spiritual awakening. The Eye of Horus represented protection, royal power, and good health, but more importantly, it symbolized the awakened state of consciousness. Indigenous shamanic traditions across the Americas, Asia, and Africa all include practices focused on activating inner vision. Whether through plant medicines like ayahuasca and peyote, through extended vision quests and fasting, or through specific meditative techniques, shamans have always known that there's a faculty of perception beyond the physical eyes, one that allows them to journey to other realms, communicate with spirits, and access hidden knowledge. Even in early Christianity, before it became institutionalized and literalized, there were Gnostic sects that taught about divine illumination and gnosis, direct, experiential knowledge of the divine that came through inner awakening rather than through external authority. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi, contains Jesus' teaching, "When you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make male and female into a single one, then you will enter the kingdom." This is the same teaching as the single eye, the unification of dualities, the awakening of inner vision, the activation of the central channel of consciousness that brings enlightenment. The consistency across traditions is stunning. Thousands of miles apart, thousands of years apart, completely isolated cultures all arrived at the same understanding. There's a dormant organ of spiritual perception in the human body, and when it's activated, it grants access to realities and powers beyond the ordinary physical senses. This isn't coincidence. It's truth, encoded in the human experience, waiting to be rediscovered by each generation brave enough to look within. What full of light really means. So what actually happens when your eye becomes single? What does it mean for your whole body to be full of light? This isn't poetic language. This is a description of an actual experience that mystics, meditators, and spiritual practitioners have reported throughout history with remarkable consistency. When the pineal gland is activated, when the third eye opens, people report experiencing intense inner light, not metaphorical light, not symbolic light, actual, visible though internal, brilliant white or golden light that seems to emanate from the center of the head and radiates throughout the body. This light is often accompanied by a sense of bliss, peace, and profound understanding that transcends intellectual knowledge. In yogic traditions, this is called Jyoti Darshan, the vision of inner light. Practitioners who meditate consistently on the point between the eyebrows often begin to see colors, geometric patterns, and eventually brilliant white light that grows brighter and more stable with practice. This isn't hallucination. It's the awakening of a perceptual faculty. Modern meditators and spiritual practitioners describe the same phenomenon. When the pineal gland activates, either spontaneously or through dedicated practice, there's often a pressure or tingling sensation at the brow point, followed by the perception of light that seems to come from within rather than without. This light brings with it a quality of consciousness that feels expanded, unified, and deeply connected to something greater than the individual self. But full of light means more than just seeing inner illumination. In spiritual traditions, light is a symbol and substance of consciousness itself. To be full of light means to be fully conscious, fully aware, fully awake to your true nature and the nature of reality. It means the dissolution of the darkness of ignorance, fear, and separation. When Jesus says, "If the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?" He's pointing to the tragedy of having this capacity for illumination, but keeping it dormant, calcified, and closed. He's saying that humans possess an incredible tool for consciousness, expansion, and spiritual power, but when that tool remains inactive, we live in a kind of darkness that's far worse than never having had the capacity at all. Think about it. You have within you, right now, the biological and spiritual equipment to access higher states of consciousness, to perceive beyond the limitations of ordinary perception, to experience unity with the divine. And yet most people go their entire lives never knowing this capacity exists, let alone activating it. That's the darkness Jesus is warning against, not moral darkness, but the darkness of ignorance about your own nature and potential. When the single eye is truly awakened, what emerges is gnosis, direct, experiential knowledge of spiritual truth that requires no intermediary, no priest, no external authority. You become your own access point to the divine. You become sovereign in your spiritual life. And historically, that's precisely the kind of knowledge that threatens institutions built on being intermediaries between humans and God. Why this teaching was hidden? Here's an uncomfortable question. If this interpretation of Jesus' teaching about the single eye is accurate, why isn't it common knowledge? Why aren't churches teaching meditation techniques to activate the pineal gland? Why was this wisdom encoded rather than explained plainly? The answer lies in understanding power, specifically who has it and who wants to keep it. Throughout history, esoteric knowledge has been carefully guarded. Mystery schools in ancient Egypt, Greece, and beyond taught initiates in stages, revealing deeper truths only to those who had proven themselves ready. This wasn't arbitrary gatekeeping, it was recognition that certain knowledge, in unprepared hands, could be misused or misunderstood. But there's another reason spiritual knowledge gets hidden. It's dangerous to power structures that depend on controlling people's access to the divine. Early Christianity was diverse, with many sects teaching different interpretations of Jesus' message. The Gnostics taught that salvation came through inner knowledge and direct experience of the divine, no church, no clergy, no hierarchy necessary. But when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine, a very specific version of the faith was codified as orthodox, and everything else was declared heresy. Why? Because empires run on authority structures. If every person can access God directly through their own awakened consciousness, what need do they have for priests, bishops, and popes? If enlightenment is an internal experience rather than something bestowed by an institution, how does that institution maintain power? The suppression of Gnostic Christianity and mystical teachings wasn't just theological disagreement, it was political necessity. A population of spiritually sovereign individuals, each accessing divine knowledge directly, cannot be easily controlled through religious authority. But a population that believes their only access to God is through external institutions, that salvation comes through obedience to church doctrine, that population can be managed, directed, and, when necessary, manipulated. This is why the Gnostic texts were burned, why mystical Christians were persecuted, why esoteric teachings went underground into secret societies and hidden traditions. The knowledge didn't disappear, it just became coded, symbolic, accessible only to those who knew how to read between the lines. If your eye be single sounds innocuous enough to pass censorship, but to those with ears to hear, it contains the entire roadmap to spiritual awakening and personal power. Even today, mainstream religious institutions tend to avoid teachings that emphasize direct experience over dogma, inner transformation over outer observance, personal sovereignty over institutional authority. There are exceptions. Of course, mystics and contemplatives exist in every tradition, but the general trend of organized religion has been to position itself between the individual and God as the necessary intermediary, the gatekeeper of salvation. What Jesus taught, and what mystics in every tradition have taught, is that you don't need a gatekeeper. You have within you everything required to access higher consciousness and divine knowledge. The kingdom of heaven isn't somewhere you go when you die. If you've been obedient, it's a state of consciousness you can access right now by awakening your inner vision. That's revolutionary, that's liberating. And that's precisely why it's been hidden in plain sight, encoded in verses that seem simple enough on the surface, but contain depths that can transform your entire understanding of spirituality and power. Practical application: awakening your single eye. So how do you actually activate this dormant organ? How do you make your eye single and fill your body with light? The truth is, there are techniques for pineal activation that have been practiced for thousands of years across different traditions. These aren't magic spells, they're practical methods based on understanding how consciousness and the body interact. Meditation and focus. The most fundamental practice is meditation with focus on the third eye point. Sit comfortably with your spine straight, close your physical eyes, and direct your attention to the space between and slightly above your eyebrows. Don't strain or force, just maintain a gentle, steady focus on that point. Many practitioners visualize light or an indigo, violet color at this location. With consistent practice, we're talking daily, ideally 20 to 30 minutes or more, you may begin to experience tingling, warmth, or pressure at the brow point. This is the beginning of activation. Over time, you might start seeing colors, geometric patterns, or flashes of light. Eventually, a steady inner light may emerge. The key is consistency and patience. You're awakening a dormant faculty, which takes time, just as building muscle or learning a new skill takes time. Decalcification. Modern life has created a significant obstacle to pineal activation: calcification. The pineal gland can accumulate calcium deposits, essentially hardening and reducing its function. Fluoride, which is added to most municipal water supplies and toothpaste, has been shown to accumulate in the pineal gland and contribute to calcification. To support pineal health, consider filtering your drinking water to remove fluoride, using fluoride-free toothpaste, reducing calcium supplementation unless medically necessary, incorporating foods rich in chlorophyll like spirulina and wheatgrass, consuming antioxidants that support brain health, getting adequate sleep in complete darkness, sunlight, and circadian rhythm. The pineal gland is deeply connected to light exposure. Getting natural sunlight during the day, especially in the morning, helps regulate your circadian rhythm and supports healthy pineal function. Some advanced practitioners engage in sun gazing, looking at the sun during the safe hours of sunrise or sunset, though this should be approached with caution and research. Equally important is darkness at night. Our modern world with artificial light disrupts natural pineal function. Sleeping in complete darkness supports melatonin production and overall pineal health. Breathwork. Many traditions use specific breathing techniques to direct energy to the third eye. Alternate nostril breathing, breath retention, and other pranayama practices are designed to balance the subtle energy channels and direct consciousness upward toward the higher centers. Sound and frequency. Certain sounds and frequencies are associated with third eye activation. The Ajna chakra is traditionally linked to the note A and frequencies around 426 to 432 Hz. Chanting Om or Om creates vibrations that resonate in the skull and can stimulate the pineal region. Plant medicines. While controversial and illegal in many jurisdictions, it's worth acknowledging that various cultures have used plant medicines, ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, peyote, specifically for their ability to activate pineal function and induce mystical experiences. These substances appear to work by mimicking or triggering DMT release, temporarily opening the third eye. This path isn't for everyone and comes with significant risks if not approached with proper preparation, guidance, and integration. But it represents another thread in the tapestry of pineal activation practices across human cultures. Signs of activation. How do you know if your third eye is beginning to open? Common experiences include pressure, tingling, or warmth at the brow point, seeing colors, lights, or geometric patterns during meditation, increased intuition and synchronicities, more vivid and meaningful dreams, a sense of expanded awareness or consciousness, moments of profound peace or bliss, feeling more connected to something greater than yourself. These aren't endpoints, they're signposts along a journey that can deepen infinitely. The goal isn't to have exotic experiences, but to awaken to your true nature and access the consciousness that's been there all along, waiting for you to notice it. Reclaiming your spiritual power. Understanding the true meaning of, "If your eye be single, your whole body shall be full of light," isn't just an interesting historical or theological footnote. It's a key to unlocking your own potential for spiritual awakening and personal sovereignty. For too long, this teaching and others like it have been interpreted in ways that keep you dependent on external authorities, institutions, and intermediaries. The radical truth that Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, and mystics across traditions have all taught is this: you already contain everything you need to access higher consciousness and divine knowledge. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait for someone else to grant you enlightenment. You have, right now, in the center of your brain, a biological and spiritual apparatus designed for exactly this purpose. The single eye isn't a metaphor, it's an invitation. It's Jesus pointing you toward a very real capacity within you that, when awakened, transforms everything. When your perception shifts from external to internal, when you discover the light that shines within, you become unshakable in your knowing. Not belief knowing, direct, experiential, undeniable. This is what threatens power structures built on your ignorance. This is what's been hidden, not because it's false, but because it's too true. A spiritually awakened person doesn't need to be told what to think, how to believe, or who to follow. They see for themselves. They know from direct experience. They become sovereign. The question is, will you investigate this for yourself? Will you spend time in meditation, focusing on that point between your eyebrows? Will you research the pineal gland and what might be blocking its function in your own body? Will you explore the practices that cultures worldwide have used to activate this dormant capacity? Or will you continue to read spiritual teachings as if they're moral guidelines and nice metaphors, missing the literal, practical, transformative power they contain? The choice, as always, is yours. But now you know what you've been missing. Now you know what Jesus was really teaching when he said those cryptic words about the single eye and the body full of light. The light was never outside you. It was never in a church, a holy book, or a religious authority. It's been in you all along, waiting for your eye to become single, for your focus to turn inward, for you to awaken to the consciousness that's your birthright. The kingdom of heaven is within you. It always has been. All you have to do is open your eyes, your real eye, the single one, and see. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The journey to enlightenment begins with a single focus, inward, to the light that's been waiting for you since before you were born.
Most people spend their entire lives begging God for things they already possess. They pray with clenched fists, demanding, pleading, bargaining. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary. God isn't withholding anything from you. The universe is already pouring infinite abundance into your life. The problem isn't God's unwillingness to give. The problem is your inability to receive. What if I told you that every prayer request actually pushes away what you desire? Every time you ask God for healing, you're affirming that you're sick. Every time you beg for abundance, you're declaring your poverty. This isn't how spiritual power works. Joel Goldsmith spent decades teaching a different way, the art of receptivity. Today, you'll discover the ancient secret that transforms beggars into receivers. You'll learn why asking is the language of separation, while receiving is the language of oneness. This isn't positive thinking. This is consciousness transformation. And it changes everything, though the shift takes dedicated practice over weeks and months. The secret Joel Goldsmith taught is deceptively simple. Stop asking and start acknowledging what already is. In the silence of your being, God's infinite supply is already flowing. Healing is already present. Abundance is already yours. Peace is already established. Your job isn't to create these things through desperate prayer. Your only task is to open yourself to receive what's already given. Think of a radio that's always broadcasting. The music doesn't start when you turn on your receiver. The music was always there. You simply tuned in. This is the consciousness shift that Joel called practicing the presence. When you stop asking God for things, something miraculous occurs. You begin to feel the divine flow that was blocked by your own resistance. Your asking created a wall between you and infinite supply. Your receiving opens the floodgates. But this isn't instant. It requires patient cultivation of receptive awareness. Here's what happens in your consciousness when you shift from asking to receiving. Your entire energy changes. Asking carries the vibration of lack, desperation, separation from your good. It says, I don't have this, and I need God to give it to me. This very attitude blocks the flow of divine grace into your experience. Receiving carries the vibration of fullness, gratitude, and union with God. It says, I recognize that God's infinite nature is my nature. What God has, I have. What God is, I am. This isn't arrogance. This is spiritual truth. Joel taught that Christ consciousness means recognizing your oneness with the divine source. When you receive instead of ask, you're no longer a beggar at heaven's gate. You're a child in your Father's house, recognizing that everything the Father has is already yours. This shift in consciousness from poverty to abundance thinking takes time to stabilize, but every moment of receptive awareness builds your new spiritual foundation. The practice itself is beautifully simple, though mastery requires patience. Sit quietly, and instead of presenting God with your shopping list of needs, simply say inwardly, I am now open to receive all that God is giving me. Feel yourself as an open channel. Imagine divine substance flowing into every area of your life. Health, relationships, finances, purpose. Don't force anything. Don't visualize specific outcomes. Don't manipulate. Simply be receptive, like the earth receives rain, like your lungs receive air, like a flower receives sunlight. This is natural, effortless, spiritual breathing. Joel called it resting in God. You're not making anything happen. You're allowing what already is. Practice this receptive awareness for just 10 minutes daily. Some days you'll feel nothing. Other days, you'll sense a profound peace or sudden knowing. Don't judge your progress. You're reconditioning decades of poverty consciousness. This is deep work that unfolds gradually, transforming your relationship with the divine from transaction to communion. Let me share Maria's story. She'd prayed for financial breakthrough for 3 years. Every month, same desperate prayers, same mounting debt, same anxiety. Her asking had become almost violent in its intensity. She'd shake her fists at heaven, demanding God answer her. Yet her situation only worsened, creating a cycle of spiritual frustration. Then Maria discovered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on receptivity. At first, she resisted. If I stop asking, God will forget about me, she protested. But desperation made her willing to try. For 30 days, She practiced simply receiving instead of asking. She'd sit quietly morning and evening, opening her consciousness to divine supply. The first 2 weeks felt empty, almost scary. Nothing seemed to be happening externally. But internally, something was shifting. The knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. A strange peace replaced her panic. By week 3, unexpected opportunities started appearing. A freelance project, a debt forgiven, a forgotten refund check. 6 months later, Maria's financial situation had completely transformed. But more importantly, her relationship with God had changed. She no longer approached the divine as a beggar, but as a beloved child receiving her inheritance. The outer abundance followed the inner shift in consciousness, proving Joel's teaching true. David's healing journey illustrates this principle powerfully. Diagnosed with a chronic condition, he'd spent 5 years in desperate healing prayers. He'd attended every prayer meeting, anointed himself with oil, declared healing scriptures. Yet his body remained sick. His asking had become aggressive, almost angry at God for not responding to his faithful petitions. A friend introduced him to Joel Goldsmith's writings on spiritual healing. The concept startled him. What if healing wasn't something God needed to send, but something already present in his true spiritual nature? What if his asking was actually the obstacle preventing him from experiencing the wholeness that was already his? David began practicing receptive awareness. Instead of begging for healing, he'd sit quietly and affirm, "I am open to receive the perfect health that is my divine inheritance." He stopped fighting his symptoms and started resting in the presence of God. This wasn't denial of his condition. It was recognition of a deeper spiritual reality. Progress came gradually over many months. Some days were harder than others. But slowly, symptoms began shifting. More importantly, fear released its grip. Within a year, medical tests confirmed what David already felt: significant improvement. His doctor called it spontaneous remission. David called it learning to receive what God had already given. Jennifer's story reveals how this principle works in relationships. She'd prayed for years for her troubled marriage to heal. Her prayers were filled with requests. "Please change my husband, make him understand me, fix our communication, save this marriage." She was exhausting herself asking God to transform her circumstances and her partner. When she encountered Joel's teaching, resistance arose immediately. "If I stop asking God to fix my marriage, it will definitely fall apart." But her current approach clearly wasn't working. She decided to experiment. Instead of asking God to change her husband, she practiced receiving divine love and peace into her own consciousness. Each morning she'd sit quietly and open herself to receive God's love, not asking for anything external to change, but allowing her inner being to be filled with divine presence. The shift was subtle at first. She noticed herself responding differently to her husband. Less reactive, more peaceful, genuinely more loving without effort or pretense. Over several months, something remarkable happened. As Jennifer changed her consciousness from asking to receiving, her husband began responding differently. The relationship dynamics shifted. They weren't magically perfect, but genuine healing occurred. Jennifer learned that when you stop asking God to change others and start receiving God's nature yourself, everything around you transforms naturally. Thomas faced bankruptcy after his business collapsed. His prayers became desperate negotiations with God. "I'll serve you forever if you just save my business. I'll give more to charity. I'll be a better person. Please, God, don't let me lose everything." His asking was filled with fear, bargaining, and the exhausting energy of trying to convince God. Joel Goldsmith's teaching came to Thomas through a book someone left at a coffee shop. The title grabbed him, The Art of Spiritual Healing. Reading it, Thomas encountered a completely different approach to prayer. Instead of begging God for business success, he learned to practice receptive consciousness, opening himself to divine guidance and supply. Thomas began 20-minute daily sessions of simply receiving. "I am open to the infinite supply of God. I receive divine guidance for my next steps. I rest in the knowledge that God's abundance is my abundance." He stopped the frantic energy of asking and entered the peaceful energy of receiving. Ideas began flowing, connections appeared, opportunities manifested. 18 months later, Thomas had not only recovered but had created a more successful business aligned with his true purpose. The external success mattered less than his inner transformation. He'd learned that God wasn't withholding anything. He'd simply been too busy asking to notice what was already being given. Receptivity opened his eyes to see and his hands to grasp divine supply that had surrounded him all along. If these transformation stories inspire you to shift from asking to receiving, like this video. To help others discover Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness-changing teachings, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey? Beyond basic receptive awareness, Joel Goldsmith taught several complementary practices that deepen your ability to receive from God. The first is what he called the practice of the presence. Throughout your day, pause frequently and simply acknowledge, God is present here and now. This isn't asking God to show up. It's recognizing the divine presence that's already here. You can do this while washing dishes, driving, working, waiting in line. Brief moments of acknowledging presence. God is here. The infinite is expressing right where I am. Divine intelligence is operating in this situation. These micro-practices train your consciousness to remain in receptive mode rather than slipping back into asking mode throughout your day. Another powerful technique is gratitude recognition. But not gratitude for what you want to receive. Gratitude for what's already being given that you haven't noticed. Thank you for the breath flowing into my lungs without my asking. Thank you for my heart beating without my requesting. Thank you for the intelligence running my body's systems. This shifts you from future-focused asking to present-moment receiving. You begin recognizing the millions of gifts already flowing to you every second. Your consciousness expands from scarcity to abundance awareness. You're not trying to get God to give. You're noticing what God is already giving. This awareness naturally opens you to receive more in every dimension of life. Joel also taught the power of inner listening as a receiving practice. Most prayer is talking at God, asking, requesting, petitioning, pleading. But true prayer is listening to God. Set aside time daily for silent receptivity. Not asking for anything, not even thinking spiritual thoughts, simply listening with your inner being for the still, small voice. This listening isn't passive, it's alert, attentive, open, like a musician listening for a distant melody, like a lover listening for footsteps. You're listening for divine guidance, for the inner knowing, for the intuitive wisdom that arises when your mind becomes quiet enough to hear. This is how Joel received many of his deepest spiritual insights. In this listening receptivity, solutions to problems appear without you asking for them. Creative ideas flow without you demanding them. Peace settles without you pursuing it. You discover that God is constantly speaking, constantly giving, constantly pouring wisdom and love into your consciousness. You were just too busy asking to hear the answers already being given. Practice 15 minutes of pure listening daily. Some days you'll hear clear inner guidance. Other days will feel silent. Both are valuable. You're training yourself to be receptive rather than demanding. You're creating space for God to fill you with divine substance. Over weeks and months, this practice transforms your entire approach to spirituality from effort to grace. Another Joel Goldsmith technique for receiving is contemplative reading of spiritual truth. But not reading to gain information. Reading to open yourself to revelation. Take a single spiritual idea, perhaps from scripture or spiritual text, and contemplate it slowly. Let it sink into your consciousness. Receive its deeper meaning without asking what it means. For example, contemplate, I and the Father are one. Don't analyze it intellectually. Don't ask God to help you understand it. Simply hold it in consciousness and let its truth reveal itself to you. Receive the revelation that naturally arises when you stop asking and start opening. This is receptive meditation. Or contemplate that the kingdom of God is within you. Sit with that statement. Feel into it. What does it mean for God's infinite kingdom to be within your own consciousness? Don't ask for understanding. Receive the understanding that emerges from silent contemplation. This is how spiritual wisdom becomes living experience rather than mere concept. Joel emphasized that truth reveals itself to the receptive consciousness. You don't have to beg for enlightenment. You simply have to stop blocking it with your asking. When you receive rather than demand, spiritual insight flows naturally. Practice this contemplative receiving with one spiritual statement daily. Let truth reveal itself to your open, receptive awareness. The final complementary practice is releasing treatment. In the spiritual healing work Joel taught, he emphasized that we don't treat conditions. We don't ask God to fix problems. Instead, we treat our consciousness to receive the truth of wholeness that already exists. This is subtle but revolutionary. You're not trying to change reality. You're opening yourself to perceive reality as it truly is. When facing any challenge, instead of asking God to remove it, practice this. I release this situation to divine intelligence. I open myself to receive God's perfect solution. I rest in the truth that infinite wisdom is already resolving this in ways I cannot see. This isn't passive resignation. It's active receptivity. You're acknowledging that God's intelligence is already at work in your situation. Your asking might actually interfere with divine solutions already in motion. Your receiving allows those solutions to become visible and manifest. It's the difference between pushing a river and floating with its current. Both involve water, but one exhausts you while the other carries you. Practice this releasing receiving with one challenge you're currently facing. Stop asking God to fix it. Start receiving divine wisdom about it. Notice how your relationship to the problem changes. Notice how solutions begin appearing that your asking consciousness couldn't perceive. This is the power of receiving over asking, and it transforms every area of your life gradually over time. Let's address the challenges you'll face when shifting from asking to receiving. The first and biggest obstacle is the feeling that you're doing nothing. Asking feels active, powerful, like you're taking charge. Receiving feels passive, lazy, like you're giving up. Your ego will scream, you have to ask, you have to pursue, you have to make things happen. This is where most people abandon the practice and return to desperate asking. They interpret the quiet peace of receiving as spiritual inactivity. But receiving is the most powerful spiritual action there is. It requires tremendous trust to stop asking and simply open yourself to what God is already giving. Your ego fears this surrender. When this resistance arises, and it will, remind yourself, asking is the energy of separation and lack. Receiving is the energy of oneness and abundance. The feeling of doing nothing is actually the feeling of stopping your interference with divine flow. You're not being passive, you're being receptive, which is profoundly active in the spiritual dimension. Expect this challenge especially in the first weeks. Some days you'll convince yourself that receiving isn't working and you need to return to asking. Notice this pattern without judgment. Gently return to receptive awareness. Over time, you'll experience enough results to trust the process. But the early phase requires faith even when everything in you screams to start asking again. Another major challenge is the delay between shifting consciousness and seeing results. You might practice receiving for days or weeks without any visible change in your circumstances. Your bank account still empty, your body still sick, your relationship still broken. The temptation becomes overwhelming to return to asking, bargaining, and pleading with God. Joel Goldsmith warned about this challenge specifically. Consciousness shift always precedes manifestation shift. Your inner transformation must stabilize before your outer world reflects it. This delay is actually a gift. It tests whether you're truly receiving or just asking in a different way. Are you receiving because you trust God or because you want results? When you face this delay, and most people do, use it to deepen your practice. This is when you discover whether you're truly learning receptivity or just using a new technique to manipulate God. True receiving continues even when nothing seems to be happening externally. It's receiving for its own sake, not for results. Many people give up right before their breakthrough. They practice receiving for 3 weeks, see no results, and return to desperate asking. Then they miss the manifestation that was about to appear. Trust that consciousness shift is happening even when circumstances haven't changed yet. The outer always follows the inner, but there's often a gap. Practice patience during this challenging phase. A third challenge is the social pressure to ask. When you tell others about your problems, they'll immediately suggest you pray and ask God for help. If you explain that you're practicing receiving instead, they might accuse you of spiritual passivity or lacking faith. You have to ask God. The Bible says, "Ask and you shall receive." This social pressure can shake your confidence in the receiving practice. You'll wonder if everyone else is right and Joel Goldsmith was wrong. You'll question whether you're being spiritually lazy. The asking paradigm is so deeply embedded in religious culture that choosing the receiving paradigm can feel lonely and heretical at times. Here's how to navigate this challenge. You don't need to convince anyone else or defend your practice. Simply do what works for your consciousness. If people want to ask, let them ask. If you've discovered that receiving opens your awareness to God's already present gifts, quietly continue your practice. Results will speak louder than explanations. You might also find it helpful to frame receiving in familiar religious language when talking to others. Instead of saying, "I don't ask God for anything," you might say, "I'm practicing resting in God's presence and trusting divine timing." This honors their paradigm while protecting your practice. Eventually, your transformation will be its own testimony to the power of receiving. The final major challenge is what Joel called taking the gift and running. This happens when receiving produces results and you immediately shift back to asking mode. You receive healing, then start asking God to heal something else. You receive financial supply, then start asking for more. You use receiving as just another way to get things from God. This defeats the entire purpose. Receiving isn't a technique to manipulate better results from God. It's a consciousness transformation from seeing yourself as separate from God to recognizing your oneness with divine source. When you receive a gift and immediately start asking for more, you're back in poverty consciousness, treating God like a vending machine. The challenge is to remain in receiving consciousness even after manifestations appear. Continue practicing receptivity not because you want more things, but because you've discovered your true spiritual identity. You're not a beggar who occasionally receives handouts. You're a child of God living in continuous flow of divine substance. This identity shift is the real goal. When results come from your receiving practice, pause and deepen your gratitude. Recognize that this manifestation is evidence of the infinite supply always available to your receptive consciousness. Don't immediately jump to the next lack. Rest in the abundance you're experiencing. Let receiving become your permanent state of consciousness, not just a temporary technique to get what asking couldn't produce. If these challenge-breaking insights resonate with your spiritual journey, like to support authentic consciousness teachings, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith practices, and comment, which obstacle are you most ready to transform through the power of receptivity? Let's explore advanced applications of receiving consciousness in daily life. Start with your morning routine. Most people begin their day asking God for strength, guidance, protection, success. What if you began instead by simply receiving? I open myself to receive all that God is pouring into this day. I am receptive to divine guidance, energy, love, and wisdom. This subtle shift changes your entire day's energy. You're not approaching life from lack, needing God to give you what you don't have. You're approaching from abundance, recognizing that divine substance is already flowing. Your job is to notice it, receive it, allow it. This receptive posture attracts opportunities, insights, and connections that asking consciousness blocks. Throughout your day, practice micro moments of receiving. Before a difficult conversation, instead of asking God for the right words, receive. I am open to divine wisdom, speaking through me. Before a challenging task, instead of asking for strength, receive. I receive the infinite energy that is my true nature. Each situation becomes an opportunity to practice receptivity. Notice how this changes your relationship with daily stress. When you're asking God to help you through challenges, you're reinforcing the belief that challenges are real and powerful. When you're receiving divine presence in challenges, you're recognizing that God's infinite nature is greater than any circumstance. This shift in consciousness transforms how you experience even ordinary moments, though integration takes consistent practice. Advanced receiving practice includes what Joel called impersonal meditation. This addresses a subtle trap many spiritual seekers fall into. They stop asking God for things but start asking for spiritual experiences. They want enlightenment, mystical visions, spiritual powers. This is just asking in disguise. True receiving is impersonal, wanting nothing, including spiritual attainment. In impersonal meditation, You practice receiving without any agenda whatsoever. You're not receiving to get healing. You're not receiving to manifest abundance. You're not even receiving to become more spiritual. You're simply resting in receptive awareness for its own sake. This is the highest form of spiritual practice Joel taught. Sit in complete stillness and openness. No goals, no desires, no spiritual ambitions. Just pure receptivity to whatever is. This might feel empty at first. Your mind will panic. What's the point if I'm not getting anything? But this is precisely the point. You're learning to receive God's being rather than God's gifts. You're experiencing union rather than transaction. This impersonal receiving gradually transforms your entire consciousness. You stop approaching spirituality as a means to an end and start experiencing it as an end in itself. God becomes not a resource to tap, but a presence to dwell in. This is the ultimate shift from asking to receiving, and it changes everything about how you live, though few people reach this level quickly. Another advanced practice is receiving on behalf of others without them knowing. Someone shares a problem with you. The automatic response is to promise you'll pray and ask God to help them. But what if you instead practice receiving divine truth for them? Silently, you open your consciousness to receive the truth of their spiritual wholeness, abundance, and divine protection. You're not asking God to fix them. You're receiving the truth of what they already are in divine consciousness. This is how Joel practiced spiritual healing. He didn't petition God to heal sick people. He opened his consciousness to receive the truth that sickness has no reality in spiritual consciousness. Only wholeness exists in God, therefore only wholeness truly exists. This practice is subtle and powerful. You might be in conversation with someone describing their problems. Internally, you're not agreeing with their problem consciousness. You're silently receiving divine truth. I receive the truth of this person's infinite nature. I am open to the recognition of their perfect spiritual wholeness. You don't argue with them. You hold receptive space for truth. Over time, you'll notice that people in your presence often experience shifts without you saying anything spiritual. Your receptive consciousness creates a space where they can receive their own healing, guidance, or breakthrough. This is advanced spiritual practice. You're not trying to change anyone. You're simply receiving truth so clearly that it dissolves false appearances in the consciousness of those around you. The most advanced application of receiving consciousness is what Joel called living the illumined life. This is when receiving becomes so natural that you no longer distinguish between spiritual practice and daily living. Your entire existence becomes one continuous flow of receiving divine presence, guidance, and substance. You're not practicing meditation. You are meditation. In this state, challenges still arise, but you meet them from receiving consciousness automatically. Financial pressure appears, and without thinking, you're already open to receive divine supply. Health issues emerge, and your consciousness is already receptive to spiritual wholeness. Relationship conflicts occur, and you're already receiving divine love and wisdom. This isn't perfection. Joel himself said there were days of doubt and fear, but the foundation is different. Your default setting is receiving rather than asking. When you slip into asking mode, you notice it quickly and gently return to receptivity. The consciousness of poverty and separation no longer dominates your spiritual life. Abundance and oneness are your natural state. Reaching this level takes years of dedicated practice for most people. Don't be discouraged by that timeline. Every day of practicing receiving moves you closer to this illumined life. Every moment you choose receptivity over asking rewires your consciousness. You're not trying to achieve some future state. You're opening to what's already present. That's the beauty of receiving. The gift is already given. You're simply learning to notice. Let's talk about what happens when receiving consciousness becomes your permanent state. First, your relationship with God fundamentally transforms. God is no longer a cosmic parent you petition for favors. God becomes the infinite presence you dwell in, the divine consciousness you share, the eternal source you recognize as your own being. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you humble in a completely different way. You're not special because God gives you things. You're ordinary because what God is, everyone is. The only difference is consciousness. Some people know they're already receiving. Others are still trapped in asking. Your job is to know, and eventually to help others discover what you found. Prayer becomes completely different. You no longer approach prayer as negotiation or petition. Prayer becomes awareness, recognition, acknowledgement of what already is. God is present. Infinite love is here. Divine wisdom is operating. Perfect supply is flowing. You're not trying to make these things true. You're recognizing they're already true and opening yourself to receive them. This consciousness shift affects every relationship in your life. You stop asking people to complete you and start receiving the love you already are. You stop demanding circumstances change and start receiving the peace that exists beneath circumstances. You stop pursuing happiness externally and start receiving the joy that is your spiritual nature. Life becomes receiving rather than achieving. When you live in receiving consciousness, you notice that things come to you rather than you chasing them. Opportunities appear without your seeking. Solutions arise without your struggle. Resources flow without your manipulation. This isn't magic. This is the natural result of aligning your consciousness with the divine flow that's always been present but was blocked by your asking. Your decision-making transforms. Instead of asking God to show you which path to take, you quiet yourself and receive divine guidance. An inner knowing arises, a subtle sense of rightness, a peaceful clarity. You don't force decisions through analysis and anxiety. You receive them from the infinite intelligence operating in your consciousness. Your creative expression flourishes. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and creators understand this. The best work comes not from striving, but from receiving. When you're in receptive consciousness, ideas flow. Inspiration strikes. Solutions appear fully formed. You're not creating from personal effort. You're receiving what's already complete in divine mind. Even your body responds differently. Stress decreases because you're not constantly in the asking energy of pursuit and lack. Your nervous system relaxes into the receiving energy of trust and abundance. Many physical symptoms that were rooted in consciousness of separation and fear begin to dissolve naturally as you rest in receptive oneness with divine source. This is gradual but genuine transformation. Living from receiving consciousness doesn't mean you never take action. Joel emphasized that receptivity leads to inspired action, which is completely different from desperate action. When you receive divine guidance, you act from inner direction rather than outer pressure. Your actions become effortless, flowing, aligned with the universe rather than fighting against it. You also discover that receiving consciousness naturally makes you generous. When you know you're living in infinite divine supply, sharing becomes natural. You're not asking God to give you more so you can hoard it. You're receiving constant flow, so giving is simply allowing that flow to move through you to others. This generosity isn't sacrifice, it's recognition of the endless supply. Your presence becomes healing to others. People are drawn to you without understanding why. They feel peaceful in your company. Problems seem less overwhelming when they're around you. This isn't your personal power. It's the divine presence flowing through your receiving consciousness. You've become a clear channel for God's love, wisdom, and healing energy. Challenges still arise in this consciousness, but you meet them differently. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is trying to emerge through this situation?" You receive challenges as invitations to deepen receptivity rather than evidence that God has abandoned you. This shift in perspective changes your entire experience of life's difficulties. The ultimate truth Joel Goldsmith revealed is this: you are not separate from God, trying to receive gifts from an external source. You are the very consciousness of God, receiving awareness of your own infinite nature. When you practice receiving, you're not getting something new. You're removing the veil that blocked your recognition of what has always been yours. This is why asking never worked. You are asking yourself to give yourself what you already had. You are demanding that God provide what God has never stopped providing. The problem was never God's unwillingness to give. The problem was your inability to receive because your consciousness was focused on lack rather than abundance, on separation rather than oneness. Now you understand why Joel emphasized stopping asking and starting receiving. Every moment you spend in receptive awareness, you're practicing the truth of your being. You're not becoming spiritual. You're recognizing the spirituality you've always been. You're not acquiring divine nature. You're receiving awareness of the divine nature that is your eternal reality. This is your new life, a life of continuous receiving. Not receiving things, though things will come. Receiving the presence of God as your own consciousness. Receiving the infinite abundance of the universe as your natural inheritance. Receiving the love, wisdom, peace, and power that have always been yours. Stop asking. Start receiving. Everything changes when you do. If your understanding of prayer and spirituality has been forever transformed by Joel Goldsmith's teaching on receiving consciousness, like this video to spread this life-changing wisdom, subscribe for more advanced spiritual teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to declare your shift from asking to receiving consciousness.
There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the heart grows weary of asking. We have asked for signs, for answers, for doors to open. We have pleaded for clarity and direction. Yet the moment we stop asking and begin to trust, an unseen current begins to carry us, quietly, tenderly, toward what has always been prepared for us. When you release the need to demand from life, you begin to hear life whisper back. The silence that once frightened you becomes sacred ground. It is here that you realize God's plan was never hidden. It was merely waiting for your stillness. The moment you stop insisting that things unfold in your way, you make space for the divine order to reveal its perfection. You see, trust is not passive. It is the deepest activity of the soul. To trust is to rest, not in resignation, but in awareness. The awareness that every circumstance, every delay, every unanswered prayer has its purpose. You are no longer chasing the future. You are allowing it to meet you in divine timing. Consider the lilies of the field. They do not toil, they do not scheme, yet they bloom in their appointed season. When you live from trust, you too bloom effortlessly. The anxiety of control fades, replaced by quiet confidence. You stop measuring outcomes and start witnessing miracles. What happens when you stop asking? You begin to see that you were never separate from the source that provides. The supply was never withheld. Your asking simply came from not knowing it was already given. The peace that surpasses understanding does not arrive from answers. It rises from trust. Every moment of your life is held in an infinite rhythm. The people you meet, the challenges you face, the blessings you receive, all are threads in the same divine tapestry. Trust allows you to see that nothing is missing, nothing is wasted, and so rest now. Seize the striving. Open your heart to the quiet assurance that all is well, that all is unfolding exactly as love intends. For when you stop asking and start trusting, you discover you were never waiting for God's plan. You were living in it all along. Trust replaces asking. True peace begins when we stop pleading for outcomes and instead trust the divine rhythm already guiding our path. Stillness reveals clarity. When we quiet the noise of constant asking, the silence becomes sacred space where God's plan unfolds naturally. Trust is active awareness. Trust is not passive surrender. It is a living awareness that every event, delay, or challenge serves a higher purpose. Divine timing is perfect. Like the lilies that bloom in their season, when we align with trust, everything we need arrives at the perfect moment. We are already in God's plan. The realization comes that we were never outside of divine care. God's plan has been carrying us all along. There comes a time in every person's spiritual walk when the heart begins to understand that asking endlessly does not always bring peace. We are conditioned to believe that asking, pleading, and striving are the ways to receive what we desire. Yet, the truth is that asking often springs from a place of fear. Fear that what we need will not come. Fear that the universe has forgotten us. Fear that perhaps our prayers have gone unheard. When we finally reach that sacred point where we stop asking and begin to trust, Something deep within us shifts. The energy that once rushed outward in desperation begins to turn inward into a calm and quiet knowing. Trust is not the absence of desire. It is the recognition that all true desires are already known by the infinite before we even form the words to express them. The very presence of a longing in the heart is proof that the fulfillment of it already exists in spirit. When you trust this truth, you no longer beg the heavens to act. You rest in the assurance that they already are. Trust becomes a gentle awareness that life is not happening to you, but through you, and that divine intelligence is orchestrating every event with precision far beyond your understanding. In the stillness of trust, you begin to feel a profound shift in your perception of control. You start to see that asking often arises from a belief that you are separate from the source that provides. You pray as if you must convince a distant God to notice your plight. But when you trust, you realize there is no distance to bridge. The presence that sustains you is not outside of you. It is your very life, breathing through your being, unfolding your path moment by moment. Asking implies separation, trusting affirms oneness. When you trust, your heart becomes quiet and peace begins to flow where anxiety once lived. You stop questioning whether you are on the right path because you understand that there is no wrong path in divine order. Every experience, pleasant or painful, becomes part of the same sacred unfolding. You no longer judge the timing of your blessings because you know that divine timing never errs. The delays that once frustrated you now feel like seasons of preparation. The unanswered prayers that once discouraged you reveal themselves as protection and grace. To trust is to walk through life with open hands instead of clenched fists. It is to release the need to demand specific outcomes and instead surrender to the higher wisdom that knows what you truly need before you do. Trust does not mean passivity, it means living with inner confidence that what is meant for you cannot be lost, and what is not meant for you cannot be forced. In trust, you move with life instead of against it. You act, but without anxiety. You hope, but without fear. You pray, but without pleading. And as you live in this consciousness, you discover something remarkable. The very things you once asked for begin to appear naturally, without struggle. The doors open not because you pushed, but because you were ready to walk through them. Opportunities align effortlessly, people arrive at the right moment, and what once seemed uncertain becomes beautifully clear. This is the quiet power of trust. It magnetizes everything you need, because you are no longer resisting the divine flow. When trust becomes your way of being, you realize that asking was never wrong, but it was always unnecessary. For the divine plan has never required your persuasion, only your participation. And participation comes not through pleading for more, but through resting in the knowing that you already have all that you need, and more is continually unfolding in perfect harmony. When the mind grows still, something miraculous begins to happen. The very silence we once resisted reveals itself as the doorway to divine understanding. We live in a world that teaches us to fill every quiet moment with noise. Words, plans, prayers, thoughts, and fears, as if silence were an absence rather than a presence. But in truth, it is in the stillness that life speaks most clearly. The human mind, restless and impatient, believes that clarity is born from constant analysis and questioning. Yet clarity arises not from noise, but from peace. The guidance we seek does not come through effort, it comes through surrender. When you stop asking and begin to rest in silence, you discover that the universe has been answering all along. You were simply too busy speaking to listen. This is the paradox of the spiritual life. The answers we chase are already within us, but they can only be heard when the asking stops. In that quiet awareness, you begin to perceive a subtle, loving intelligence that has always been guiding your steps. The path that once appeared uncertain begins to glow faintly with direction, not through words, but through an inner sense of rightness. Stillness is not the same as idleness. It is not a withdrawal from life, but a deep participation in it. It is listening to the rhythm of your own soul, to the pulse of divine order that beats beneath every moment. When the noise of fear, worry, and expectation subsides, the gentle whisper of truth becomes audible. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" but instead sense naturally what is yours to do. The inner compass, long clouded by mental noise, begins to point clearly toward peace. This kind of stillness requires trust. The ego resists it because it cannot control silence. It wants movement, reaction, explanation. It wants to plan the outcome before taking the first step. But the soul knows a deeper wisdom, that the universe unfolds in perfect sequence when you are quiet enough to let it. Stillness allows divine timing to reveal itself without interference. What once seemed delayed now appears perfectly timed. What once seemed lost reveals its purpose. You stop wrestling with life and begin to walk in harmony with it. In this quiet space, even your relationship with prayer changes. You no longer pray to be heard, you pray to listen. The act of prayer becomes an opening rather than a request, a communion rather than a transaction. You realize that God does not need your words. He needs your awareness. The still heart becomes a sacred vessel through which divine wisdom pours. Answers are not sent from above. They rise gently from within. When you live from stillness, life takes on a new rhythm. Situations that once triggered anxiety now invite calm observation. The need to control outcomes fades, replaced by faith in the invisible harmony working behind the scenes. You begin to notice that when you act from stillness, your actions are more effective, your words more inspired, and your timing more precise. You are no longer reacting to life, you are responding with grace. The world outside you may still rush and clamor, but within there is a sanctuary untouched by chaos. That sanctuary is where divine guidance speaks, softly, steadily, and with infinite patience. The mind may not always understand it, but the heart recognizes its truth. In that sacred stillness, you come to see that God's plan was never silent. You were simply not still enough to hear it. And as the silence deepens, the veil lifts, revealing that what you once called waiting was actually being guided all along. Trust is not the act of doing nothing. It is the quiet strength of knowing that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. It is the deepest activity of the soul, unseen, steady, and powerful. When you trust, you participate in life from the awareness that there is a wisdom greater than your reasoning, a rhythm beyond your control. You begin to understand that every experience carries divine intention, even when it does not fit your human understanding. To trust is to stand calmly in the middle of uncertainty and still know that all is well. When we speak of trust, we often imagine it as a passive waiting, a kind of spiritual stillness without motion. But true trust is alive. It is the inner movement of faith that aligns you with divine timing and purpose. It is not the same as resignation or indifference. Resignation says, "There is nothing I can do," while trust says, "There is nothing I need to fear." In trust, you move forward without anxiety, because you no longer depend on the outer world to confirm your safety. You are guided by something deeper, the inner conviction that divine wisdom cannot fail. This awareness transforms how you meet every challenge. Where once you saw obstacles, you now see preparation. Where once you felt delay, you now recognize divine sequencing. Every moment, even the difficult ones, becomes an invitation to strengthen your faith. You begin to see that what you called detours were actually the straight path seen from a higher view. The unseen hand that directs your steps never loses its way. Trust allows you to rest in that truth without needing constant proof. As trust deepens, fear begins to lose its power. Fear feeds on the need for control, on the belief that you must manage every outcome. Trust dissolves that illusion. You realize that life does not require your control, only your cooperation. There is a natural intelligence within all things, the same intelligence that causes the tides to move, the stars to shine, and the heart to beat without instruction. That same intelligence governs your life. When you trust it, you move with grace, even through the unknown. You do not need to understand every detail, you only need to remain open to the unfolding. Trust also changes the way you perceive time. When you live from fear, you are always rushing, always pushing, always trying to force results. But when you live from trust, time becomes your ally. You understand that divine timing is never late. What belongs to you cannot miss you, and what is not yours cannot stay. In this awareness, patience becomes peace rather than frustration. You wait not with tension, but with quiet confidence, knowing that the invisible work of spirit is taking place even when you cannot see it. To live in trust is to shift from asking, "Why is this happening?" to saying, "This too is part of the plan." You stop seeking explanations and start seeing patterns of grace. The mind's need to analyze gives way to the heart's capacity to accept. You no longer demand that life meet your expectations. Instead, you open yourself to the divine pattern that exceeds them. Trust reveals that there is order in what appears chaotic, purpose in what seems painful, and direction in what feels uncertain. As this awareness becomes your foundation, your energy changes. You no longer carry the heavy burden of forcing outcomes or fearing loss. You act but without attachment. You plan but without anxiety. You hope but without desperation. Each step you take is lighter, guided by an invisible assurance that you are not walking alone. And in that gentle surrender, life begins to unfold effortlessly. You do not abandon action, you infuse it with faith. You do not stop caring, you stop worrying. That is the sacred balance of true trust, a living awareness that while your hands move, your heart rests in the care of something infinitely wiser. When you begin to trust divine timing, life transforms from a series of random events into a symphony of purpose. You start to notice that nothing comes too soon and nothing arrives too late. Everything meets you precisely when you are ready to receive it. The human mind, impatient and eager, often wants to rush the process, to make things happen through force, strategy, or insistence. Yet, the soul understands that timing is sacred. Just as flowers bloom only when the season calls them forth, so too does every event in your life unfold according to a divine rhythm beyond human planning. There is a subtle beauty in realizing that your delays are not denials and your waiting is not wasted time. When you trust divine timing, you stop measuring your progress by how quickly things happen. Instead, you begin to see value in preparation. You understand that every pause is polishing your character, every setback is strengthening your faith, and every closed door is a gentle redirection toward what is truly meant for you. The same force that spins the planets and directs the tides is guiding your journey. To rush divine timing is to interfere with perfection. Trusting the process requires humility. The humility to admit that your limited vision cannot see the full picture. From where you stand, the road may appear twisted, delayed or uncertain, but from the higher view of spirit, every turn leads you exactly where you need to go. Divine timing never makes mistakes. What seems like a detour is often a safeguard, preventing you from reaching a destination before you are ready to inhabit it. There is a divine intelligence that ensures that the right people, opportunities, and lessons appear in your life at the exact moment when your soul can benefit most from them. When you surrender to this truth, peace begins to replace pressure. You no longer demand answers, you allow them to reveal themselves. The frantic energy that once made you chase outcomes transforms into quiet expectancy. You realize that waiting is not inactivity, it is participation in the unseen work of the universe. While your mind rests, your destiny is aligning itself behind the veil. The timing of divine order cannot be accelerated by worry nor delayed by fear. What is meant for you will find you, because it is already written into the fabric of your existence. This trust also transforms how you experience other people. You no longer compare your path with theirs. You stop looking at others' achievements as proof that you are behind. You understand that every soul is unfolding at its own divine pace, that no two journeys are identical, and that your moment of blooming will not look like anyone else's. Comparison fades when you trust divine timing, because you realize that your story is being written by the same hand that writes the stars. And the stars never compete for their light. When you truly trust this timing, you also find gratitude in moments that once frustrated you. You thank the delays because they protected you from mistakes. You bless the unanswered prayers because they guided you toward truer ones. You appreciate the slowness because it taught you patience and depth. You see how the pauses in your life allowed you to grow roots before you reached upward to bloom. Everything that once felt withheld now appears as a gift of preparation. And so each day becomes less about striving and more about allowing. You wake with peace, knowing that you are never early, never late, only perfectly aligned with the rhythm of divine purpose. When divine timing becomes your compass, you walk through life with serenity. You stop chasing miracles, for you see they have been unfolding all along, right on time. There comes a moment of deep awakening when you realize that you were never outside of God's plan. All the striving, searching, and questioning begin to quiet as you see that everything, even your confusion, has been part of a greater harmony. The mind, limited in its understanding, often imagines that God's plan is something distant, something to be found after years of effort or spiritual discipline. But the truth is far simpler and far more profound. The divine plan is not a destination, it is the very fabric of the life you are living now. Every breath, every encounter, every experience, whether joyful or painful, is woven into it with perfect care. When you understand that you are already in the plan, fear loses its hold. You no longer believe that one wrong decision can separate you from your purpose. You stop worrying about missing opportunities or making mistakes, because you recognize that even your detours are used by the divine to guide you back to center. Nothing is wasted in the unfolding of divine order. The missteps you regret, the delays that frustrate you, the losses that broke your heart, all of them are threads in the same tapestry, each contributing to the wholeness of who you are becoming. To live in this awareness is to walk through life with trust instead of tension. You begin to see that you were never meant to control the script, only to play your part with sincerity and faith. The plan does not depend on your perfection, it depends on your willingness to listen and to follow the quiet guidance that rises from within. That gentle inner voice, the one that urges peace when your mind screams for control, is the voice of the plan itself. When you follow it, life begins to flow more smoothly. the coincidences that occur, the doors that open, the people who arrive at just the right time. These are not accidents but divine affirmations that you are moving in rhythm with the higher order. The beauty of realizing you are already in God's plan is that it frees you from striving. You stop living as though you are trying to earn your way into grace. You stop chasing meaning, because meaning is already present in every moment, even the simplest actions. A kind word, a gentle thought, a moment of gratitude become sacred expressions of your place in the plan. Nothing is too small to carry divine purpose, for God works not only in great miracles but in quiet details. As you live with this awareness, your vision begins to change. You start to see unity where once you saw separation. You recognize that every person you meet is also a participant in this same divine orchestration. The people who challenge you are shaping your strength. The ones who comfort you are reminders of divine tenderness. Even those who seem to oppose you are playing their part in your awakening. When you see life this way, judgment fades and compassion deepens. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin to whisper, "Thank you for showing me what I need to learn." This realization brings profound peace. You no longer fear the unknown, because you understand that the unknown is simply the next page of a story already written by love. You do not need to rush to the end to know it will be good. You live each day as a willing partner in creation, trusting that the one who designed the stars also designed your path with equal precision. There is no distance between you and the plan, no separation between your life and divine intention. You are and always have been exactly where you are meant to be. And in that awareness, asking ceases, striving dissolves, and gratitude becomes your prayer. The revelation dawns that you were never searching for God's plan. You were living in it every moment, guided by an unseen hand that never stopped holding you, even when you thought you were lost. And so, the moment you stop asking and begin to trust, life itself becomes your prayer. You no longer chase signs or demand answers, because your heart recognizes the quiet certainty that everything is already unfolding as it should. The storms no longer shake you, for you know they are passing waves on an eternal sea of divine order. Each breath becomes a reminder that you are cared for, guided, and held in a love far greater than your understanding. Rest now in that awareness, not as a hope, but as a knowing. The plan of God is not waiting for you somewhere in the distance. It is alive within you, breathing through every moment of your existence. Walk gently, trust deeply, and let your soul be still, for in the quiet of trust you will finally see what has been true all along. You were never forgotten, never abandoned, and never outside the perfect unfolding of divine grace.